Okay, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, Chapter 10. Slowly the pattern of our days grew, and the shaped itself into a happy life. In the mornings we were awakened, I would go down the hall at once to make sure the front door was locked. When we were most active in the early morning because no one was ever around. We had not realized with the gates opened and the path exposed to public use, the children would come. One morning, I stood beside the front door, looking out through a narrow pane of glass and saw children playing in our front yard. Perhaps the parents had sent them to explore the way and make sure it was navigable. And perhaps the children can never resist playing anywhere. They seemed a little uneasy playing in front of our house, and their voices were subdued. I thought that perhaps they were only pretending to play because they were children and were supposed to play, but perhaps they were actually sent here to look for us, thinly disguised as children. They were not really convincing, I decided as I watched them. They moved gracelessly and never once glanced that I could see at our house. I wondered how soon they would creep into the porch and press their small faces against the shutters, trying to see through the cracks. Constance came up behind me and looked out over my shoulder. There are the children of strangers, I told her, and they have no faces. They have eyes. Pretend they're birds. They can't see us. They don't know it yet. They don't want to believe it. And they won't ever see us again. I suppose that now they've come once, they'll come again. All the strangers will come, but they can't see inside. And now, can I please have my breakfast? The kitchen was always dark in the mornings until I unbolted the kitchen door and opened it to let the sunlight in. Then Jonas went to sit on the step and bathe, and Constance sang while she made our breakfast. After breakfast, I sat on the step with Jonas while Constance washed the kitchen. Barricading the sides of the house had been easier than I expected. I managed it in one night with Constance holding a flashlight for me. At either side of our house, there was a spot where the trees and bushes grew close to the house, sheltering the back and narrowing the path, which was the only way around. I brought piece after piece from the pile of junk Mr. Harler had made on our front porch and heaped the broken boards and furniture across the narrowest spot. It would not really keep anyone out, of course. The children could climb over it easy, but if anyone did try to get past, there would be enough noise and fallen broken boards to give us plenty of time to close and bolt the kitchen door. I had found some boards around the tool shed and nailed them rudely across the glass of the kitchen door, but I disliked putting them across the sides of the house as a barricade, where anyone might see them and know how clumsily I built. Perhaps, I told myself, I might try my hand at mending the broken step. What are you laughing about now? Constance asked me. I'm thinking that we are on the moon, and it's not quite as I supposed it would be. It's a very happy place, though. Constance was bringing breakfast to the table, scrambled eggs and toasted biscuits and blackberry jam she had made some golden summer. We ought to bring as much food as we can, she said. I don't think of the garden waiting there for us to come and gather growing things, but I'd feel much better if we had more food put securely away in the home. I will go on my winged horse and bring you cinnamon and thyme and emeralds and cloves and cloth of gold and cabbage and rhubarb. We were able to leave the kitchen door open when we went down to the vegetable garden because we could see clearly whether anyone was approaching my barricades and run back to the house if we needed to. I carried the basket and we brought back lettuce still gray with ash and radishes and tomatoes and cucumbers and later berries and melons. I usually ate fruit and vegetables still moist from the ground and the air, but I disliked eating anything while it was still dirty with the ash from our burned house. Most of the dirt and soot had been blown away, and the air around the garden was fresh and clean, but the smoke was in the ground, and I thought it would always be there. As soon as we were safely settled, Constance had opened Uncle Julian's room and cleaned it. She brought out the sheets from Uncle Julian's bed and the blankets and washed them in the kitchen sink and set them outside to dry in the sunlight. What are you going to do with Uncle Julian's papers? I asked her, and she rested her hands against the edge of the sink, hesitating. I suppose I'll keep them all in the box, she said at last. I suppose I'll put the box in the cellar. And preserve it? And preserve it. He would like to think that his papers were treated respectfully, and I would not want Uncle Julian to suspect that his papers were not preserved. I had better go and see that the front door is locked. The children were often outside on the front lawn playing their still games and not looking at our house, moving awkwardly in little dashing runs and slapping one another without cause. Whenever I checked to make sure that the front door was locked, and I looked out to see if the children were there. Very often I saw people walking on our path now, using it to go from one place to another, putting their foot down where once only my foot had gone. I thought they had used the path without wanting to, as though each of them had to travel at once to show it could be done. But I thought that only a few of the defiant, hating ones came by more than once. I dreamed away the long afternoon while Constance cleared Uncle Julian's room. I sat in the doorsill with Jonas asleep beside me and looked out in the quiet, safe garden. "Look, Merricat," Constance said, coming to me with an armful of clothes. "Look, Uncle Julian had 2 suits and a top coat and a hat. He walked upright once. He told us so himself. I can just barely remember him years ago going off one day to buy a suit, and I suppose it was one of these suits he bought. They were neither one of them much worn. What would he have been wearing on the last day with them? What tie have he have on at dinner? I would surely like to have it remembered." She looked at me for a minute, not smiling. "It would hardly be one of these. When I came to get him afterwards at the hospital, he was wearing pajamas and a robe. Perhaps he should have on one of these suits now. He was probably buried in an old suit of Jim Clark's." Constance started from the cellar, then stopped. "Merricat?" "Yes, Constance." "Do you realize that the things of Uncle Julian's are the only clothes left in our house? All of mine burned, and all of yours. And everything in there is in the attic. I have only this pink dress I have on." I looked down, and I'm wearing brown, and yours needs washing and mending. How can you tear your clothes so, my Merricat? "I shall weave a suit of leaves at once, with acorns for buttons." "Merricat, be serious. We'll have to wear Uncle Julian's clothes." "I'm not allowed to touch Uncle Julian's things. I shall have a lining of moss for cold winter days, and a hat made of bird feathers." "That may be all very well for the moon, Miss Foolishness. On the moon you may wear a suit of fur like Jonas, of me. But right here in our house you are going to be clothed in one of your Uncle Julian's old shirts, and perhaps his trousers too. Or Uncle Julian's bathrobe and pajamas, I suppose. No, I'm not allowed to touch Uncle Julian's things. I will wear leaves. But you are allowed. I tell you that you are allowed." "No," she sighed. "Well," she said, "you'll probably see me wearing them." And then she stopped and laughed and looked at me and laughed again. "Constance," I said. She put Uncle Julian's clothes over the back of the chair and, still laughing, went into the pantry and opened one of the drawers. I remembered what she was after, and I laughed too. Then she came back and put an armload of tablecloths down beside me. "These will do very nicely, elegant Merricat. Look, how will you feel in this, with a border of yellow flowers, or this handsome red and white check? The damask, and I'm afraid, is too stiff for comfort, and besides, it has been darned." I stood up and held the red and white checkered tablecloth against me. "You cut a hole for my head," I said, and I was pleased. "I have no sewing things. You will simply have to tie around your waist with a cord and let it hang like a toga." "I will use the Damascus for a cloak. Who else wears a damask cloak?" "Merricat, oh Merricat." Constance dropped the tablecloth she was holding and put her arms around me. "What have I done to my baby Merricat?" she said. "No house, no food, and dressed in a tablecloth. What have I done?" "Constance," I said. "I love you, Constance." "Dressed in a tablecloth like a rag doll. Constance, we are going to be very happy, Constance." "Oh, Merricat," she said, holding me. "Listen to me, Constance. We are going to be very happy." I dressed at once, not wanting to give Constance more time to think. I chose the red and white check, and when Constance had cut a hole for my head, I took my gold cord with the tassel that Constance had cut for me from the drawing room drapes and tied it around for a belt, and looked, I thought, very fine. Constance was sad at first and turned away sadly when she saw me, and scrubbed ferociously at the sink to get my brown dress clean. But I liked my robe and danced in it, and before long she smiled again and laughed at me. Robinson Crusoe dressed in the skins of animals, I told her. He had no gay clothes with a gold belt. I must say, you never looked so bright before. You'll be wearing the skins of Uncle Julian. I prefer my tablecloth. I believe the one you are wearing now was used for summer breakfasts on the lawn many years ago. Red and white check could never be used in the dining room, of course. Some days I shall be a summer breakfast on the lawn, and some days I shall be a formal dinner by candlelight, and some days I shall be a very dirty Mary cat. You have a fine gown, but your face is dirty. We have lost almost everything, young lady, but at least we still have clean water and a comb. One thing was most lucky about Uncle Julian's room. I persuaded Constance to bring out his chair and wheel it through the garden to reinforce my barricade. It looked strange to see Constance wheeling an empty chair, and for a minute I tried to see Uncle Julian again, riding with his hands in his lap. But it all remained that Uncle Julian's presence were the worn spots on the chair, and a handkerchief tucked under the cushion. The chair would be powerful in my barricade, however, staring out always at intruders with a blank menace of dead Uncle Julian. I was troubled to think Uncle Julian might vanish altogether, with the papers in a box and his chair on a barricade and his toothbrush thrown away, and even the smell of Uncle Julian gone from his room. When the ground was soft and Constance planted a yellow rosebud at Uncle Julian's spot on the lawn, and one night I went down to the creek and buried Uncle Julian's initialed gold pencil by the water, so the creek would always speak his name. Jonas took to going into Uncle Julian's room where he had never gone before, but I did not go inside. Helen Clark came to our door twice more, knocking and calling and begging us to answer. But we sat quietly, and when she found she could not come around the house because of my barricade, she told us from the front door that she would not come back, and she did not. One evening, perhaps the evening of the day Constance planted Uncle Julian's rose bush, we heard a very soft knock at the front door while we sat at the table eating dinner. It was far too soft a knock for Helen Clark, and I left the table hurriedly, silently, down the hall to be sure that the front door was locked, and Constance followed me, curious. We pressed silently against the door and listened. "Miss Blackwood?" somebody said outside in a low voice. I wonder if he suspected we were close to him. "Miss Constance? Miss Mary Catherine?" It was not quite dark outside, but inside where we stood we could only see one another dimly, two white faces against the door. "Miss Constance," he said again, "listen." I thought he was moving his head from side to side to make sure that he was not seen. "Listen," he said, "I got a chicken here." He tapped softly at the door. "I hope you can hear me," he said. "I got a chicken here. My wife fixed it, roasted it nice, and there are some cookies and a pie. I hope you can hear me." I could see that Constance's eyes were wide with wonder. I stared at her, and she stared at me. "I sure hope you can hear me, Miss Blackwood. I broke one of your chairs, and I'm sorry." He tapped against the door again, very softly. "Well," he said, "I'll just set this basket down on your step here. I hope you heard me. Goodbye." We listened to quiet footsteps going away, and after a minute, Constance said, "What shall we do? Shall we open the door?" "Later," I said. "I'll come when it's really dark." I wonder what kind of pie it is. Do you think it's as good as my pies? We finished our dinner and waited until I was sure that no one could possibly see the front door opening. And when we went down the hall and I unlocked the door and looked outside, the basket on the doorstep covered with a napkin. I brought it inside and locked the door while Constance took the basket from me and carried it into the kitchen. "Blueberry," she said when I came in. "Quite good, too, still warm." She took she took out the chicken, wrapped in a napkin, and the little packages of cookies, touching each lovingly and with gentleness. "Everything's still warm," she said. "She must have baked them right after dinner, so he could bring them right over. I wonder if she made two pies, one for the house. She wrapped everything while it was still warm and told them to bring them over. These cookies are not crispy enough. I'll take the basket back and leave it on the porch so he'll know we found it." "No, no," Constance caught me by the arm. "No, not until I've washed the napkins. What would she think of me?" Sometimes she brought bacon and home cured. Sometimes they brought bacon, home cured, or fruit, or their own preserves, which never were never as good as the preserves that Constance made. Mostly they brought roast chicken, sometimes a cake or a pie, frequently cookies, sometimes a potato salad or coleslaw. Once they brought a pot of beef stew, which Constance took apart and put back together again according to her own rules for beef stew. And sometimes there were pots of baked beans or macaroni. "We are the biggest church supper they ever had," Constance said once, looking at a loaf of homemade bread I'd just brought inside. These things were always left on the front doorstep, always silently, and in the evenings. We thought that the men came home from work and the women had baskets ready for them to carry over. Perhaps they came in darkness, not to be recognized, as though each of them wanted to hide from the others, and bringing us food was somehow a shameful thing to do in public. There were many women cooking, Constance said. "Here is one," she explained to me once, tasting a bean, "who uses ketchup, and too much of it. And the last one used more molasses. Once or twice there was a note in the basket. It's just for the dishes, or we apologize about the curtains, or sorry for your harp." I always set the basket back where we had found them and never opened the front door until it was completely dark and we were sure that no one was near. I always checked carefully afterwards to make certain that the front door was locked. I discovered that I was no longer allowed to go to the creek. Uncle Julian was there, and it was too far from Constance. I never went farther away from the edge of the woods, and Constance went only as far as the vegetable garden. I was not allowed to bury things anymore, nor was I allowed to touch stone. Every day I looked up at the boards across the kitchen windows, and when I found small cracks, I nailed on more boards. Every morning I checked at once to make sure the front door was locked, and every morning Constance washed the kitchen. We spent a good deal of time at the front door, particularly during the evenings, when most people came by. We sat, one on either side of the front door, looking out through the narrow glass panes, which I had covered almost entirely with cardboard, so that we each had only a small peephole and no one could possibly see inside. We watched the children playing and the people walking past. We heard their voices, and they were all strangers, with their wide staring eyes and their evil open mouths. One day a group came by bicycle. There were two women and a man and two children. They parked their bicycles in the driveway and lay down on our front lawn, pulling at the grass and talking while they rested. The children ran up and along our driveway and over and around the trees and bushes. This was the day that we learned that the vines were growing over the burned roof of our house, because one of the women glanced sideways at the house and said that the vines almost hid the marks of the burning. They rarely turned squarely to look at our house face to face, but looked at it from the corners of their eyes or from over a shoulder through their fingers. "I used to be a lovely house, I hear," said the woman sitting in the grass. "I heard that it was quite a local landmark at one time." "Now it looks like a tomb," the other woman said. "Shh," the first woman said, and gestured towards the house with her head. "I heard," she said loudly, "that they had the staircase, which was very fine, carved in Italy, I heard." "They can't hear you," the other woman amused. "Who cares if they do anyway?" "Shh. No one knows for sure if anyone's inside or not. The local people tell some tall tales." "Shh, Tommy," she said to one of the children. "Don't go near those steps." "Why?" said the child, backing away. "Because the ladies live in there and they don't like it." "Why?" said the child, pausing at the foot of the stairs and giving a quick look backward at our front door. "The ladies don't like little boys," the second woman said, and she was one of the bad ones. I could see her mouth from the side, and it was the mouth of a snake. "What would they do to me?" "They'd hold you down and make you eat candy full of poison. I heard that dozens of bad little boys had gone too near to the house and have never been seen again. They catch little boys and they shh. Honestly, Ethel." "Do they like little girls?" The other woman drew near. "They hate little boys and little girls. The difference is they eat the little girls." "Ethel, stop. You're terrifying the children." "And it isn't true, darling. She's only teasing you." "They've never come out except at night," the bad woman said, looking evilly at the children. "And that's when they do and that's when it's dark they go hunting for little children." "Just the same," the man said suddenly, "I don't want to see the kids going too near to that house." Charles Blackwood came back only once. He came in a car with another man late one afternoon, and when we had been watching for a long time. All the strangers had gone, and Constance had just stirred and said, "Time to put on the potatoes." And the car turned into the driveway, and she settled back again. Charles and the other man got out of the car in front of the house and walked directly in the foot of the steps, looking up, although they could not see us from inside. I remember the first time Charles had come and stood looking up at our house in just the same manner, but this time he would never get in. I reached up and touched the lock of the front door and made sure it was fastened, and on the other side of the driveway, Constance turned and nodded to me. She knew too that Charles would never get in again. "See," Charles said outside at the front of the steps. "There is the house, just like I said. Doesn't look as bad as it did, now the vines have grown so, but the roof's been burned away and the place was gutted inside." "Are the ladies in there?" "Sure," Charles laughed. I remembered his laughter and his big, staring white face, and from inside the door I wished him dead. "They're in there all right," he said. "So is the whole damn fortune." "You know that? They've got money in there that's never even been counted. They've got it buried all over in a safe full, and God knows where else they've hidden it. They never come out, just hide away inside with all that money." "Look," the other man said. "They know you, don't they?" "Sure, their cousin. I came here on a visit once." "You think there's any chance you might get one of them to talk to you? Maybe just come to the window or something so I can get a picture?" Charles thought. He looked at the house and at the other man and thought, "If you sell this to the magazine or something, do I get half?" "Sure, it's a promise." "I'll try it," Charles said. "You get back to the car out of sight. They certainly won't come if they see a stranger." The other man went back to the car and took out a camera and settled himself on the other side of the car where we could not see him. "Okay," he called, and Charles started up the steps to the front door. "Connie," he called. "Hey, Connie, it's Charles. I'm back." I looked at Constance and thought she had never seen Charles so truly before. "Connie." She knew now that Charles was a ghost and a demon, one of the strangers. "Let's forget all that happened," Charles said. He came close to the door and spoke pleasantly with a little pleading tone. "Let's be friends again." I could see his feet. One of them was tapping and tapping on the floor of the porch. "I don't know what you've got against me," he says, "and I've been waiting and waiting for you to let me know I could come back again. If I did anything to offend you, I'm really sorry." I wish Charles could see inside, could see us sitting on the floor on either side of the front door listening to him and looking at his feet while he talked beggingly to the door 3 feet above our heads. "Open the door," he said very softly. "Connie, will you open the door for me, for cousin Charles?" Constance looked up to where his face must be and smiled unpleasantly. I thought it must be a smile she had been saving for Charles if he ever came back again. "I went to see old Uncle Julian's grave this morning," Charles said. "I came back to visit old Julian's grave and see you once more." He waited for a minute, and then, with a little break in his voice, "I put a couple flowers, on the old fellow's grave. He was a fine old guy, and he was always pretty good to me." Both Charles's feet, I saw the other man. Beyond Charles's feet, I saw the other man coming out behind the car with his camera. "Look," he called, "you're wasting your breath, and I haven't got all day." "Don't you understand?" He turned away from the door, but his voice still in a little break in it. "I've got to see her once more. I was the cause of it all." "What? Why do you suppose two old maids shut themselves in the house like this?" "God knows," Charles said. I didn't mean it to turn out this way." I thought Constance was going to speak then, or at least laugh out loud, and I reached across and touched her arm, warning to be quiet. But she did not turn her head to me. "If I could just talk to her," Charles said. "We can get some picture of the house anyway. With me standing here or knocking at the door, I could be knocking frantically at the door." "You could be stretched across the doorsill dying of a broken heart for me," the other man said. And he went to the car and put his camera inside. "Wasted time." "And all that money, Connie," Charles called loudly. "Will you, for heaven's sake, open that door?" The other man said from the car, "I'll just bet you're never going to see those silver dollars again." "Connie," Charles said, "you don't know what you're doing to me. I never deserved to be treated like this. Please, Connie." "You want to walk back to town?" the other man said, and closed the car door. Charles turned away from the door and then turned back. "All right, Connie," he said, "this is it. If you let me go this time, you'll never see me again. I mean it, Connie. I'm leaving, the other man said from the car. I mean it, Connie, I really do. Charles started down the steps, talking over his shoulder. Take a last look, he said. I'm going. One word could make me stay. I did not think he was going to go in time. I honestly didn't know whether Constance was going to be able to contain herself until he got down the stairs and safely into the car. Goodbye, Connie, he said from the foot of the steps, and then turned away and went slowly towards the car. He looked for a minute as though he might wipe his eyes or blow his nose, but the other man said, Hurry up! And Charles looked back once more, raised his hand sadly, and got into the car. Then Constance laughed, and I laughed, and for a minute I saw Charles in the car turn his head quickly, as though he heard us laughing. And the car started and drove down the driveway, and we held each other in the dark hallway and laughed, with tears running down our cheeks and echoes of our laughter going up the ruined stairway to the sky. I'm so happy, Constance said at last, gasping. Mary Cat, I'm so happy. I told you that you would like it on the moon. The Carringtons stopped their car in front of our house one Sunday after church, and we sat quietly in their car looking at the house, as though supposing that we would come out if there were anything the Carringtons could do for us. Sometimes I thought of the drawing room and the dining room, forever close away, with our mother's lovely broken things laying scattered, and the dust sifting gently down to cover them. We have new landmarks in our house, just as we had a new pattern for our days. The crooked, broken-off fragments, which was all that was left of our lovely stairway, was something we passed down every day, and we came to know us as intimately as we had once known the stairs themselves. The boards across the kitchen windows were ours, and part of the house, and we loved them. We were very happy, although Constance was always in terror lest one of our 2 cups should break, or one of us had to use a cup without a handle. We had our own well-known and familiar places, our chairs at the table and our beds and our places beside the front door. Constance washed the red and white tablecloth and the shirts of Uncle Julian's which she wore. And while we were hanging in the garden to dry, I wore tablecloth with a yellow border, which looked very handsome with my gold belt. Our mother's old brown shoes were safely put away in my corner of the kitchen, since in the warm summer days I went barefoot like Jonas. Constance disliked picking many flowers, but there was always a bowl on the kitchen table with roses or daisies, although, of course, she never picked a rose from Uncle Julian's rose bush. I sometimes thought of my 6 blue marbles, and I was not allowed to go to the long field now. And I thought that perhaps my 6 blue marbles had been buried to protect the house which no longer existed and had no connection to the house where we lived now and where we were happy. My new magical safeguards were the lock on the front door, and the boards over the windows, and the barricades along the sides of the house. In the evening, sometimes we saw movement in the darkness on the lawn and heard whispers. Don't, the ladies might be watching. Do you think they can see in the dark? I've heard they can see everything that goes on. Then there might be laughter drifting away in the warm darkness. They will soon be calling this Lover's Lane, Constance said. After Charles, no doubt. At least Charles could have done, Constance said, considering seriously, was shoot himself through the head in the driveway. We learned from listening that all of the strangers could see from outside, where they looked at all was a great ruined structure overgrown with vines, barely recognizable as a house. It was the point halfway through the village and the highway, in the middle spot of the path, and no one ever saw our eyes looking out through the vines. You can't go on those steps, the little children warned each other. If you do, the ladies will get you. A boy once dared by others, stood at the front of the steps facing the house, and shivered and almost cried and ran away, and then called out shakily, Mary Cat, said Constance, would you like a cup of tea? And then fled, followed by all of the others. That night, we found the doorsill, a basket of fresh eggs, and a note reading, he didn't mean it, please. Poor child, Constance said, putting the eggs into a bowl to go into the cooler. He's probably hiding under the bed right now. Perhaps a little good whipping to teach him manners. We will have an omelet for breakfast. I wonder if I could eat a child if I had the chance. I doubt if I could cook one, said Constance. Poor strangers, I said. They have so much to be afraid of. Well, Constance said, I'm afraid of spiders. Jonas and I will see it, that no spider ever comes near you, O Constance, I said. We are so happy.